I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is unlearning to shrink. So we come in as a bright light, and then through life's lessons, we learn to self-regulate and dim that light. And what we're looking at today is learning how to shine brightly again. So it should be a fun conversation. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any stress, tension, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present, right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So today we're talking about unlearning to shrink. Now, because the premise is that we learn to shrink, we learn to dim our light. And how do we learn this? We learn this by other people squashing the light, oftentimes. For instance, if we're really exuberant and vital and alive and playful and having fun, somebody else could say, quiet down, or what are you so excited about? Or that's so what's so special about that? And immediately the vitality and the enthusiasm and the joy is just squashed. And so we learn to contain ourselves because that squashing is so devastating. I had this happen yesterday, actually, and it was amazing. I was so delighted because I had been on a Zoom call with a friend in Australia who was on vacation someplace in Australia. And in the background, well, she showed me, she turned the camera because there was a balcony in her hotel room, and on the balcony a white yellow crested cockatoo showed up. Now, I love birds. I love birds, and I find cockatoos absolutely amazing. And I have never, ever seen a cockatoo, a wild cockatoo. And this bird came and this bird came and sat on the railing. Now, these birds may be acclimated to begging, for goodies, but I was just enthralled to see this cockatoo just sitting on this woman's balcony. It was extraordinary. And then another cockatoo showed up, and I was just entranced. And then another, and then a fourth. There were four white cockatoos just sitting on her balcony ledge. during our call. They had all arrived during our call, and I was over the moon. This is just pure magic to me. And I shared it with somebody, and they said, so, like, don't you remember the birds that were, came to beg at such and such a place? I don't see why that's so extraordinary. And for whatever reason, it was like having all this joyful momentum and hitting into a brick wall and smashing your nose. That's what it felt like to me. And I realized, this is a pattern of how we get trained out of our highest expression. This is a pattern for, or an example of how we're taught to pull in our light, and how we're taught not to share the joys and enthusiasms of our lives with others, because we get received or we don't get received, and we do get shut down. Like, what's wrong with you that you're so boisterous and lively, right? Or what is wrong with you, like being made wrong for expressing our light, being excited over something that you may have accomplished, and somebody saying, you know what's what's wrong with you? You have such a big ego. What are you boasting about? Rather than sharing in your excitement for an accomplishment. And I think it's so important to be able to find a way to reclaim ourselves, to reclaim our vitality, to reclaim our joy, to be able to engage with life in its miraculousness, right? Rather than temper ourselves down to a mediocrity that so many of us inhabit. And I guess what I'm discovering is that it kind of takes an act of courage to be willing to be giddy and happy and excited, because it's not the mainstream. It's not part of the consensus reality to allow someone's brightness to sparkle. Most of us, rather than encouraging that sparkle, well, I don't know if that's true, but some of us encourage the sparkle, and some of us are threatened by it somehow, and we dampen it. And I guess we get to look at, well, why would we dampen that sparkle and then become self-dampening? It reminds me of the person I was talking to you about, who was talking about guarding themselves from being sloppy happy because it could hurt other people, or due to fear of hurting other people. And it's the human condition is such an interesting dynamic, right? It's such an interesting dynamic to see the ebbs and flows of emotion and reactivity that we all are, and to navigate those, the perils and pitfalls, so to speak, of our human reactivities, right? So it reminds me of the stories of the crabs in a bucket, that as one crab's climbing to get out of the bucket, the other crabs pull it back down. And I think that this can happen. I not only do I think it can happen, I've experienced it and I've witnessed it. And I think we get to choose whether we are people who uplift others or who are trying to pull them back down. When someone has big dreams, I was considering calling this morning's conversation the dream killers. But when someone has big dreams, why is it that some people feel it's their business to dissect those dreams, to dismantle those dreams? I think it's important to have people to share these things with and to share our dreams with, to support us. And it's also really important to be discerning about who we share them with. Because particularly when dreams are new, they can be fragile. And we're often wrestling with rising to the capability to follow through, to implement those dreams. Oftentimes our dreams, they're dreams because they're beyond our current reach. And they are calling for us to rise to a new level of expression and a new perception of self, oftentimes, in order to be able to fulfill on those dreams. And with that being the case, if we share those dreams with people who are invested in maintaining the view that they have of who we are, oftentimes people are invested in an identity for us more than we are invested in that identity. So people have a perception of who you are and how you are, and they're invested in that identity. And if you do something or you act in a way that is discontinuous with that identity, or that casts light on their own identity that they don't, that makes them in some way uncomfortable, all in their internal process, they may try to pull you back into that crab barrel to be able to maintain the status quo, because the disruption of thought and their own idea of how it reflects on them can be so threatening that they need to take you down so that they don't have to question themselves. I mean, that's part of the dynamic sometimes. And this is why it is so critically important that as we choose to shift our lives, one of the things that we need to recognize is that we live in a dynamic system, and patterns exist within that system that are kind of self-sustaining. And breaking out of that system to come into a new expression in a certain way threatens the existing dynamic of the system. So there's challenge and resistance that arises to that change. And almost like the closer you reach to the edge of that system, the stronger the resistance may become. And this is why it is so utterly and completely important to find people, and maybe only one person is needed, but to find people who lift you, who are there as an empowering element, people who can serve as a validating mirror, as a reinforcement, as an empowering force, energy in your life, so that you can be creating a new dynamical system that enables that shift. And this is why I think these shifts are more of a quantum nature than of a linear one, because we need the momentum of energy that gets us to a place where we can break out of the existing orbital and into the next quantum energy state. The biggest challenge to all of this is that oftentimes, and to varying degrees, I guess maybe all the time, can't always say, you can't really get away with saying all the time, but how about most of the time, we internalize these constraints and we come to believe limitations that have been imposed upon us and then become self-imposed. And breaking out of the orbit of those limitations in itself takes tremendous commitment and energy and concentrated energy to allow our light to shine, because there are light killers, and those people that are light killers are likely killing the light because they feel threatened, because your expansiveness is threatening their status quo in some way or another. We can see this, we actually see this in science. It's amazing to me how so-called scientists will converge like a pack of rabid dogs on someone who is proposing a new theory. I was hearing I didn't get that. Could you try again? I said theory and Siri thought I said series. No, Siri, turn off. You'll need to unlock your Here we go. Anyway, I think I've shared that I've been listening to this wonderful, wonderful podcast called The Telepathy Tapes, and it's about non-speakers and the very rich world that we have come to know they exist in through devices that enable them to spell out communications. And the scientific community, or a good portion of the scientific community, has been apparently working hard to debunk the validity of the communications from these people as not being real, not being authentic. And there was a woman who was talking about telepathy because these folks have documented in many ways their telepathic capabilities. And this woman had a license as a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and she said something about telepathy, or she wrote something about telepathy in these clients. It was a study that she did, and immediately her license was revoked before people even read what she had written and read anything about the study. Eventually, she was able to get her license reinstated, but the damage had been done. Like, her reputation had already been heavily tarnished. And this is again, it's dream killers, right? That the status quo works really hard to maintain itself. And that happens in our individual lives, where people are very committed to things remaining as they are, to being able to maintain a worldview that they have unchallenged. It's very much like the story I've shared with you. When I first learned muscle testing, I demonstrated it to my father, and I tested his arms and got yes and no responses. And he literally pulled his arms away from me and said, "You can't tell me that you just got messages from my body." And I said, "You just experienced it. Is it that this is such a threat to your worldview that you're willing to deny your own experience?" And he said, "Yep." And I think that this is this is very much a common experience. So, unlearning to shrink, we learn through these experiences where our joy is squashed, or our ideas are dissembled, or and sometimes people are well-meaning in these responses, trying to get you to be realistic, whatever that is, right? But one of the keys to that unlearning, maybe, to connect with the vitality that those dreams and those emotions bring, choose to choose life in a conscious way, and to not let that experience of life be dictated by people who are electing not to embrace that energy and vitality, or by people who are not generous enough to empower you in your expression. Find other people, find ways to cultivate your own integrity, integration, your own coherence. Find ways to allow you allow yourself to express that joy, because that joy can be contagious. So sometimes it's contagious, and sometimes people want to squash it. And what we get to do is to be discerning around our choices of who to surround ourselves with. So the key to becoming an even bigger light is to find people who can hold that light and surround yourself with them, to find people who can uplift you, and it can be even just one person, or to find ways that otherwise support you in being that brilliance that you are. to unlearn the shrinking, to beam brightly, and to become even more fully your authentic self. To give yourself permission, right? It's a hard thing to do sometimes because there have been costs, emotional costs to that expression, right? That's why we've learned to shrink in the first place, to self-regulate, because we didn't want to suffer the pain of somebody just sort of stealing the thunder. But we don't have to let them steal it. We don't have to let that happen. And I noticed for myself that I became a lot more selective about who I would share something with. It's kind of like trusting someone with your heart. But the stronger our own hearts are, the clearer we are in our own being and expression, the greater permission that we give ourselves to be, the less it matters whether someone else chooses to share in our joy. And I encourage you to find people in your life, or find some support in your life that supports you in being joyful, that supports you in your dreams, that uplifts and empowers you. And it can be as simple as one person, and they're out there. So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it's a pleasure and a privilege to have the opportunity to share these morning musings on what it is to be human. So until next time, so much